If you can go ahead and take your seats, we're going to get started. Thanks for coming out. My name is Joe Perdetto. I am the Yucaipa Director of Government Affairs and Public Information Officer. And I'd like to start off the evening with a quick couple of introductions. I want to thank Scott Ward for coming out and representing Supervisor Don Rao's office. Thank you, Scott. In the back, we have our City Manager, Chris Mann. Assistant City Manager, Jennifer Crawford. Our Chief of Police, Captain Mike Walker. And Lieutenant Scoville, Steve Scoville. And Burtec, whether they know it or not, they were some of the most desired attendees. And we have Richard Nuno and Michael Heftman from his team and the rest of the team. And then we also have representatives from Fish and Wildlife. We have Jeff Vilpeak and Kevin Howells and the rest of their teams here. And I want to make a special introduction for the person who made this happen. We got a phone call from Kandie Cansler just recently and mentioning the bear situation and said she wanted to organize this. She took the initiative to lock in all the key players here and especially Fish and Wildlife and was very passionate about organizing this. So I want to thank Kandie for your effort on that and introduce you and come on up and go ahead and get us started.
Is that going to work? Is it on? You can hear me? Okay, because I can't hear me. That's a good thing. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay, now I hear me. First off, thank you for all who are here. And I have to say, I'm really a little disappointed for all of the hoopla that's been on Facebook and around the community about having the bears down in town. I expected more people to come tonight. So heaven help them if they complain on Facebook in the next couple weeks, because I'm going to get them. But anyway, you all are here, and I really, really appreciate it. And I think you're going to go home with some good information, and that's good for all of us. Number one, we live in a wildlife corridor that goes from the washes that run throughout our town, from the top of the mountains, from up in Oak Glen, Wildwood, and Crafton Hills, all the way to the freeway. And nothing has been more obvious in the last month or two than these little bears catching those corridors and coming down. We get the mountain lions occasionally wandering through, but this is something new for the city people down in town. My sister shocked the daylights out of me, sending me a video and going, who do I call? She's down on the end of 8th Street and had the bears in her yard. I get them in my yard all the time, but I didn't expect that, so that was pretty funny. I know it's quite a shock to look out your window and see a bear. It's not good for the bear either. They don't interact with humans any more than we like to interact with them. There's a lot of things that we can do to prevent problems, to prevent a dead bear. I know you're probably tired of hearing a fed bear is a dead bear, but I just heard today again of another incident where somebody is thinking it's really, I think she named her bear, they told me Brownie, because she feeds him brownies. It makes me crazy. You're creating worse of a problem than there needs to be. We can learn to coexist. I've been in Oak Glen since 1981. I have all of it come through my yard. I live with it. I enjoy it. I haven't ever in all those years had a major problem with anything. Over on the table, as you come in, there are some samples of things you can do to purchase to haze the bears. You can do these with coyotes also. The more uncomfortable you make it for them to be in your area, the better for everybody. There's air horn sample over there. There's bear spray, and I found out in purchasing it, it's expensive. And for the same price, one will shoot 20 feet, the other one will shoot 30 feet. You never want to spray it if it's into the wind coming your direction, or you're going to get it as much as the bear does or more. There's also an apparatus sitting over there on the table that Jeff James has assembled for me. It's solar. It is motion activated. It's called the Scarecrow. You can plant it in your yard wherever you think you've got the problem with the bears. Maybe it's around your trash cans, who knows? And you hook a hose to it and it sets off when whatever animal, raccoon, bear, coyote, whatever comes through your yard, heaven forbid mountain lion. That kind of covers everything that I had. I know one of the most important things are the bear-resistant trash cans, and we'll hear from Burtech in a little bit. But the ones that you really need to hear the most from are Fish and Wildlife. So if Kevin wants to come on up and take over, it's your show now.
Just turn it on.
You want to do it? All right. It's like I'm at prom in my lapel. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kevin Allison, the human wildlife conflict specialist covering San Bernardino and Riverside counties with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And yes, a big thanks to Kandie for organizing this and reaching out and getting the space. And I know she's been a good bear steward in the community, so big thanks. So tonight we'll be discussing bear biology, conflict bear management, and how to prevent conflicts with bears in Yucaipa in Southern California. So our goal this evening is to provide you with the information that will empower you and your neighbors with knowledge that will help you succeed in preventing conflicts, not just with bears, but coyotes and all wildlife native here to Southern California and specifically San Bernardino County. And we'll be happy to take any questions that you may have at the end of the presentation tonight. I'm sure we can have some good constructive Q&A and conversations. All right, so if you're not familiar with the department, we are a state resource agency, and our mission is to manage California's diverse fish and wildlife and plant resources and the habitats upon which they depend for their ecological values and for their use and enjoyment by the public. So let's start and discuss a little bit about bear biology. So the only species that we have here in California is the American black bear. The typical habitat ranges from the mountainous environment all the way to foothill communities just like this, going all the way down through Rancho and the San Gabriels. The average adult male bear weighs between 150 and 350 pounds. Female bear between 100 and 200 pounds. But a lot of that is resource dependent. And if there's great habitat with an abundance of food and water. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Hank the Tank up in Tahoe. And one of these bears we've dubbed Ovaltine here. We have some large bears, and they can get up to 600 pounds. In areas where there's much larger, less fractured habitat, like the Sierras, bears can have a pretty large home range, from 50 to 150 square miles. But in areas, like the San Bernardinos, where you have state highways, the 18, the 330, 38, many mountainous communities as well, the landscape is fractured. So as a byproduct, our bears here have much smaller home ranges. And for an example, in the San Gabriels, the average home range is between 3 and 11 miles. So comparatively, it's much, much smaller. Black bear's diet is heavily omnivorous. They eat fruits, berry, vegetation, sedges, grasses, insects, other animal protein when the opportunity presents itself, but their diets are almost 90% vegetarian. And unfortunately, a major component of that and some of these urban, suburban foothill communities is trash and birdseed and suet from suet feeders. Bears generally hibernate in other parts of the state. Usually it's in the fall and winter, all throughout the early spring. But most bears here do not hibernate just based off of climate conditions. There's no immediate need to hibernate. However, sows that are having cubs that year, cubs of the year, they will hibernate and come out of the den usually in early spring and start moving around in March and April. And then another question we get asked quite frequently is how many bears are in the state? What is the number? Or how many bears are in the San Bernardinos here locally? So we have an estimated population of 30 to 40,000 bears statewide, and then a rough estimate of 300 to 400 individuals here in the San Bernardinos. A lifespan for your average bear could be 20 to 25 years, but unfortunately, bears in our periphery have much shorter average lifespans. Bears that spend times around homes and neighborhoods and the suburban corridors, whether it's vehicle strikes or just conflict with humans, their average lifespan is much, much shorter. Another common question I get quite a bit is, do we have brown bears here or grizzly bears here? I have a grizzly bear in my yard eating from my bird feeder. I have a grizzly bear in my yard sitting in my pool. We don't. We have, despite the state flag being a bit misleading, we do not. We have the California black bear, as I mentioned, but their coats can come in a wide range of colors. So here's some photos of just different color patterns that you might have seen already, ranging from completely blonde to cinnamon or a reddish rust color, all the way to your typical kind of classic looking black bear with a jet black coat. Right, now let's chat about bear habitat. So this is kind of your classic bear habitat, photo of bear habitat, coniferous forest at elevation. This is great bear habitat. Now here, a nice mature oak bearing acorns. Bears love acorns. And as you'll notice, it's not necessarily just your classic bear habitat. There's a table there and a grill. So obviously humans are interacting in this space as well. So it's always important to remember that you're not, even if there is, an area for picnic or a campground or something like that, just because there is resources there for you, it does not mean that you are the sole occupier of that space and will be even after you leave. How about this? This looks like bear habitat. It is. These foothill neighborhoods are increasingly common. We've increasingly common reports of bears in and out of foothill communities where there are resources for bears in the periphery of the mountains. You can expect bears to be there or to be using those spaces as well when there's food, shade, water. So, talking more about what is and what isn't bear country. So, bears, as everyone here is probably aware, do not understand property lines, property boundaries, city lines, fences. They are wild animals that follow the attractant. So they do not recognize these lines. As I mentioned, the major requirements for bears to consider suitable habitat: food, water, shelter, other bears. All of those things are found here in Yucaipa, whether that's large fountains, pools in backyards, fruit trees, bird feeders. These are suitable requirements for suitable habitat for bears. And it just so happens that we, as stewards of the land, are overlapping in that space now. And you'll notice one buzzword I use throughout the presentation is attractants. So where there are unsecured attractants, there will be bears. So next, we'll discuss just the general life cycle, early life cycle of bears with reproduction. So females or sows will breed in summer and throughout fall. And during winter, cubs of the year are born. Again, they'll stay in the den with the sow all throughout winter. During spring, the sow and her cubs will emerge from the den and start moving around. They'll obviously be very food stressed, so they'll go down to the lower elevations where here in Southern California, there is an abundance of food in early spring. Spring green up, higher precipitation loads. So come early spring, sows and cubs will be moving around, and definitely reported, at least in my time here in my position in Yucaipa, and especially the eastern parts of Yucaipa. After the sow and the cubs have emerged from the den and spent spring, come summer, the cubs are weaned from her, so no longer dependent on her for lactation, and are starting to seek food and resources that they will use for the remainder of their lives. And then after this period, they'll spend about another year with the sow. So this is now year 2 of their life. Come end of summer, late summer, early fall, the sow will kick out the cub or the cubs. They're of age at this point. They're mature enough to find resources on their own. So kind of think of a teenager, late stage teenager. It's time to get out and be self-sufficient. So obviously, as most of us know, bears have incredible senses of smell, but their eyesight, generally speaking, is equal to humans. They do have excellent hearing, but their sense of smell is incredible. So what you may not perceive as something that's smelly, whether that's a bird feeder hanging off of your deck, whether that's a small structure you have in your backyard that you store your cats in, and there's cat food in there, but it's locked up tight. To you, it might not smell. A bear can absolutely smell through that. So just to put it in comparison, a bloodhound has 7 times the scent ability of the human being, which we think is incredible. Bears have 100 times the scent ability of a human being. So again, anything that is locked, that even, pumpkin seeds, for example, that don't give off an odor, a bear can smell it. A bear can smell who grabbed that bag before they even placed it in the structure. So we always have to be cognizant of their ability to smell, because when they start smelling food in our residential areas, they start spending more time in our residential areas and therefore start becoming food conditioned and habituated to people. So this nose leads them on a never-ending search for food. Day in, day out, the bears wake up and their mission is to find food. And as I mentioned, unfortunately, fortunately, it's a beautiful area to live here, and there's plenty of fruit trees. I know a lot of neighborhoods that I've spent time in over the past year and a half managing human-bear conflict. Lots of stone fruit trees. There is an abundance of them, and even something like that, bears can smell. And if those are in residential neighborhoods, they're spending all day, every day, seeking that resource. And unfortunately, that means in more and more increasingly urban areas. Here's an example of how to not hang your bird feeder. Another example of how to not hang your hummingbird feeder. Anything like that smells incredible to them. Birdseed has a ton of fat. It's calorie rich. It's something we may not see as a big food source, but there's tons of calories in birdseed and suet as well for a bear. It's a non-Burtec trash can. You're off the hook with this one. Which brings us to conflict bear management. So what is a conflict bear? How do we define a conflict bear? So in early 2022, the Department of Fish and Wildlife retooled the bear policy and defined some key terms and how we categorize bears and their actions. So a conflict bear is described and defined as a bear that requires action by the department or the public due to its behavior or its situation. This includes 4 important categories. First is a no harm, no foul bear. Next is a habituated bear. Then we have a depredation bear. And finally, a public safety bear. The type of conflict of each of these categories absolutely influences the management response for that individual bear. And again, generally speaking, bears avoid people. They do not seek out human beings in any sort of way. We are not on their radar. But when they're food stressed and there are trash cans that are out at the front of houses, at the front by the street, there are bird feeders, there are chickens, people are feeding your dog on the back of your porch, and there's dog bowls out there, that will bring bears into urban areas. And this is a picture from Yucaipa from my first month on the job. So we'll discuss no harm, no foul bear. So a no harm, no foul bear can be considered, right place or wrong place, wrong time. So these aren't bears that are necessarily habituated or food conditioned to anthropogenic food sources yet. They're drawn into areas where they can't persist. So further and further into residential neighborhoods, further into town. And these bears do not have, under a no harm, no foul designation, they do not have an easy or natural way to get back into bear habitat, usually without intervention. And the trend that we do see is these yearling bears, so these young bears that are now fresh on the landscape without the sow for, if they're naturally kicked out or the sow, expired from a vehicle strike or what have you. These are the bears that we definitely see getting more and more into no harm, no foul, and generally into human-bear conflict scenarios. Your older bears, they're seasoned. They've been around. They usually know what's more urban and less urban environments, but that is not to say if there is a severe attractant in an area that is not typical bear habitat, any bear can explore that and find itself, on the other side of Stater Brothers or something like that. If you do encounter a no harm, no foul bear, or any bear for that matter, always give it space. You never want to corner a bear. Give it space to leave the area. Do not charge it. You want to safely haze it so it can leave the immediate area. This is another Yucaipa specific photo from a gentleman who's on holiday in Colorado. He's not here. He's a homeowner who I interact with quite a bit. So habituated bear. So habituated bears are defined as a general nuisance, but no extensive property damage or aggression towards humans. The property damage is the key phrase there. So habituated bears are bears that, again, get drawn into neighborhoods or just are exposed to human interaction at a higher interval, and they lose that natural fear of people. So for habituated bears, it's very very similar to no harm no foul, or just any bear you encounter. Removing the attractant or restricting access to the attractant is crucial. This brings up a good question. Are some bears born habituated? This photo is good evidence. Yes, absolutely. This is a family group that was around quite a bit in a neighborhood last year. The sow was already, she was habituated due to an attractant problem in the neighborhood, a bevy of trash cans that were just available, nights before pickup. She had her cubs, and then from the first moments outside of the den, she introduced them to the life that she knew. So those cubs' only existence on the landscape was in the suburban environment and around people and around trash and around food. So they ostensibly were born habituated and did not really have the chance to be truly wild bears. Next are the depredation bears. So depredation is threatening to, actively damaging, or destroying property. So property could be, a window into your home, breaking a window, breaking a door, landscape damage, damage to, a hobby coop that you might have, or livestock loss. So depredation to livestock, chickens, etc. With depredation bears, so these bears have been around humans quite a bit and are not as responsive to hazing. So for depredation bears, I always recommend more extreme levels of hazing. So something that actually makes contact with the bear, whether that's being sprayed with a hose, with the nuisance wildlife sprinklers, one of which are back there. Those work great. But some way to actively try and re-educate the bear itself so it realizes that there is a physical and expected response when interacting with humans. So if you do sustain property damage, within our policy, you can request a depredation permit by submitting a wildlife incident report on the state website. Or a wildlife biologist will come assess the level of property damage, what non-lethal measures were taken, and then based on what we observe and document, if you are requesting a lethal or a non-lethal depredation permit, they can be issued. Note, it's important that it can be issued, but it's not a will be issued. We have to be responsible stewards of the land here, and just because you're not doing the right things of securing attractants, and a bear is drawn into the property and causes property damage, that does not mean we will automatically issue a lethal permit to remove that bear. We have to be responsible as well when we're sharing this landscape with them. And just to note here, it's again, I keep harping on it. It is very important to manage attractants, because this depredation bears, habituated bears, food conditioned bears, all of these types of bears, categories of bears, can be prevented early on if we are diligent about securing our attractants, so we can be proactive instead of reactive. Lastly, is the public safety bear. This is a bear that has made physical contact with a human or is exhibiting an immediate threat to public health and safety. An immediate threat is a bear that exhibits one or more aggressive behaviors directed towards a person. The wildlife branch, wildlife biologists do not determine or classify what is an immediate threat. That is determined by our game wardens and our law enforcement personnel. So it is, if you have a bear that you've cornered in your backyard, that you found, and it has nowhere to go and it bluff charges you, I am not the decider on whether that cornered bear that bluff charged you is an immediate threat to public safety. That is handled by our law enforcement staff. So now on that note, let's talk a little bit about what is normal bear behavior. So if you do encounter a bear, I do receive reports of, someone seeing a bear and it stood up and looked at them and sniffed around, and they perceive that as an aggressive act towards the person. A normal bear behavior in that scenario, standing up, ears raised, sniffing the air, that is normal. It's most likely looking for an avenue or looking for a way to get itself out of the environment because it is stressed. A lightly stressed bear can have a stiffened stance, out of place yawning, like consecutive yawning, just strange behavior, or a change in its general orientation. A moderately stressed bear will huff or chuff. If you've heard deer chuff, it's similar to that, or moan. They can also pop their teeth with the back of their tongue or snarl their upper lip. Any of that is a clear indication that this bear is becoming more and more stressed and more agitated. Another telltale sign of that is, the swaying back and forth of the bear's head. That is a byproduct of a pretty moderate stress. And then lastly, the highly stressed bear is a rapid vocal huffing, an open mouth, making guttural noises, swatting at the ground, or more stressful scenarios is a bluff charge. Whether that's 1 step, 10 steps, a bluff charge is a bear's way of telling you it is stressed and it wants to get out of that area. Or it could be a sow, and if you don't see cubs, there could be cubs in that area. And sows frequently bluff charge when they feel their cubs are in danger. Now to the million-dollar question that we absolutely get asked most: why can't we just relocate a bear? Say there's a bear that's been in your neighborhood. Why can't we relocate it? It'll just solve the problem, right? It doesn't. So, first off, when we attempt to translocate a bear, obviously we need to chemically immobilize the bear. During the summers, especially now with this heat wave, chemically immobilizing a bear in a already stressful environment is one of the more dangerous things we can do to that individual animal. If we are to the point where we are translocating the individual, bears do not just assimilate to the forest wherever that environment is, tens of miles, couple miles away. They don't just seamlessly fold into the landscape. They become disoriented, And from what a lot of our GPS collar data in the state and outside of the state tells us, these bears will usually, if it is a habituated bear, come either right back to the actual neighborhood of where it was translocated from, or go to another nearby neighborhood where there is scent attractants drawing that bear in. And unfortunately, for translocating habituated bears, they know roads. They know roads equal houses, houses equal food. So bears, when we translocate them, a huge risk is vehicle mortality because we know they use roads to get back to where they were translocated from. Another reason is, like I mentioned, is moving the conflict to another area. So if a bear is translocated, say from here over to somewhere in the San Bernardinos, we don't have a lot of habitat here that doesn't include people and houses. So now we've just moved that conflict bear from here into somebody else's backyard, which is not a sustainable process. If the attractant situation in the area where the bear was translocated from is still existing, all moving the bear out of that area is going to do is create a vacuum for another bear to occupy that space. So it's not solving the problem. It's creating another space it's creating a space for another bear to come in and occupy. The potential to spread disease is a risk. And lastly, I kind of touched on it, but what is the wild? So the San Bernardino Mountains are comparatively are not that large.